He is Cooperstown, class of 1990, one of the classiest individuals to ever toe a rubber in Major League Baseball. The only pitcher in Major League Baseball history to win a World Series game in 3 different decades. He is Jim Palmer here on The Rich Eisen Show. How are you, Jim?
I'm quite well. I'm better than my wife, who tore her left hamstring at the insertion. And let's see, she's 2 weeks from surgery with another 3 weeks to walk. So I've kind of been a caregiver.
You're carrying a load right now, Jim.
Well, actually, I just have to, she's on crutches.
Okay.
And one of those little wheeling things, so I have to help her up and down the stairs.
Okay, I got it.
But she's doing a lot better, a lot better than she was. And boy, for a Type A personality, this is a great learning lesson.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, you've been around Earl Weaver for all those years, Jim.
Yes.
I mean, you can't get more Type A than that, I'd imagine, right?
No, you can't. But, it's funny, of course, Earl passed away, 4 Decembers ago. And
right.
Great thing about playing for him, he was pretty demanding. But, not only Earl, but the rest of the team, my teammates over 20 years, we pretty much were on the same page, which was about winning.
Yes, of course. It was funny. Last week, we were talking, it was the 31st anniversary of Bob Knight throwing a chair, and just talking about great meltdowns by some all-time great coaches and obviously managers. And we showed one from Earl Weaver from 1980 where he and Bill Haller got into it, and, Earl got the gate. And the thing that I really enjoyed about that exchange was looking at the Memorial Stadium scoreboard behind them. It appeared to be just one batter into the top of the first. It was just only 7:39 at night in Baltimore. Do you remember this one, Jim?
Oh, of course. What Earl didn't know that Channel 9, this is before cable, and so Channel 9 was a station from Washington, and they had wired Bill Haller.
That's right.
So, and Earl didn't know it. He actually got an injunction because, of course, he said, "Where are you going to be when I get in the Hall of Fame?" And whenever, and then Haller said, "What for messing up?" He used a little different word than messing up, but messing up the 1979 World Series because we had lost to the Pirates, the previous October. And of course, once Earl knew that it was taped, we could always kind of read his lips because, even when he wasn't arguing with an umpire, it seemed like he was arguing with one of us. So we kind of knew what the language was.
Yeah.
But it was one of those memorable things. I mean, one time he went out to play at first base with Nick Bremigan, and he inadvertently kind of made a point and kind of clipped him in the jaw with a right. Bremington didn't go down, but I tell you what, another flurry of punches might have gotten him to the turf.
Oh my gosh.
But Earl was Earl, and he wanted the umpires to be at a certain standard. Mm-hmm. I think it probably would have been a little fairer if he had actually put his glasses on so he could have actually seen what was going on, but he was a little bit vain.
Jim, that's fantastic. Could you imagine if there was somebody like that today in Major League Baseball today that would just be, I don't think there's an equivalent, right?
Well, back then you had Billy Martin. Mm-hmm. Billy was great, with kicking dirt on umpires, shoes. And, I saw Ralph Houck, who was, totally different. He was, an ex-armed forces guy. But, he went crazy down the first baseline and, in Yankee Stadium when Frank Robinson made a catch, fell into the stadium, and it took him about 2 minutes to come out of the stands to end the ball game. It was the first game of a doubleheader, and, Ralph went crazy. But, there's a fine line, but I think back then when, the Orioles we had a lot of great teams. We never, until Edward Bennett Williams bought the club in, 1979, 1980, did we ever draw over 1.2 million people. And we won 109, 108, 101 games. So Earl was a big part of that because of the entertainment value.
Who was the best player you ever saw, Jim? Ever?
Well, the best guy that I ever played with, and I played with Eddie Murray, who had, over 500 home runs, over 3,000 hits. One of the 4 guys to do that, with Aaron and Mays, and then Rafael Palmeiro, who, might have had a little bit of a help. I pitched against Mays in my first All-Star game in Cincinnati in '70. Willie must have been something to see on an everyday basis. Pitched against Hank Aaron. Dusty Baker, who's now managing the Nationals, said, he learned so much about baseball because people forget how good an all-around player Hank Aaron was. 3,700 hits, 755 home runs. He could steal bases. He was a tremendous defensive outfielder. But I played with Cal, and who played 2,600 and 32 straight games in the Hall of Fame with over 400 home runs, 3,000 hits. But the best offensive player and the guy that made the biggest difference on our team was Frank Robinson. And we traded for him in '66. He won the Triple Crown, 49 home runs, 2 in the World Series against the Dodgers. But I think just the intensity, and then, of course, if you were a teammate of Brooks Robinson, with 16 straight Gold Gloves, who's probably the nicest guy on the planet, it's hard to. So that's how I got to the Hall of Fame. I picked the right team and the right players.
No, you're pretty darn good yourself. Jim Palmer joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show. Who is the best pitcher in Major League Baseball today? Who do you think is the best one that's out there in 2016?
We're not going to go with how much they're making.
That's right.
Greinke. Greinke got $34 million a year. I think in the National League, Clayton Kershaw. He wears number 22. I don't know how that happened. That was my number.
Nice.
The Red Sox certainly hope David Price will be the best pitcher in the American League. But you got Felix Hernandez up in Seattle. Again, this is a team that even though they, of course, new general manager Jerry DePoto, so he's made some changes, but they always seem to underachieve as a team, at least in recent years. But he's a marvelous pitcher. But there are a lot of good guys that can pitch, and with a couple of exceptions, maybe the demands aren't as much on starting pitchers as it was in my era. My first roommate was Robin Roberts, and I was 19 and Robin was 38, and the Orioles were smart enough to let me be on the team when I was 19, and then smart enough to let me room with Robin. And the interesting thing, he had 607 major league starts, and he had 305 complete games.
Unbelievable. That's remarkable. We'll never see even a fraction.
Well, you don't have to do it. It doesn't mean that these guys aren't very good pitchers, aren't very capable. It's just a little bit different. It's kind of unusual because the storyline for the Orioles in 2016 will be, Wieters came back on the qualifying offer. They got Chris Davis, who led the American League in home runs, as he's done 2 of the last 3 years, $161 million deal. They have Adam Jones. They have some pretty good players. But at the end of the day, what allowed them to win 96 games in 2014 and didn't turn out as well as it did that year last year was the starting pitching. So, they don't have a true number one guy, but they do have some guys that can pitch like number one guys. It's not a done deal. I think the Red Sox, they felt very comfortable giving David Price $210 million over, 7 years, because they feel like if you get to the playoffs, and of course the Red Sox would either win a World Series or they finish last, they seem to be the favorites in the American League East this year.
Jim Palmer joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show. And the favorites in the entirety of Major League Baseball are the Chicago Cubs, which is remarkable in itself, just that sentence alone. But one of the reasons why, and whether they will be able to do it or not, is because their ace, a former Oriole, and Jake Arrieta, we'll see what he can do in back-to-back years. Are folks in the Mid-Atlantic scratching their heads over where that Jake Arrieta came from?
Well, we
Jim?
saw glimpses of it. I go back and look at my career, and I think, okay, let's see. I tore my rotator cuff after I'd won a World Series game, thought my career was over when I was about 22. George Bamberger, who went on to be a terrific pitching coach for us, he had, 4 Cy Young winners. He had 12, 20-game winners, managed in Milwaukee, managed with the Mets. If you look at, what George would have been able to do with a guy like Jake Arrieta, he would have been able to get him, number one, to, calm down, to feel confident, which is what he did with Mike Cuellar, McNally, myself, Pat Dodson, when we all won 20 games in 71. And it just didn't seem that there was much of a connection with the pitching coaches in Baltimore. I think, he had elbow surgery one year, but he came back, hard worker, industrious. And, he's not the first guy, Rich, as you know, that all of a sudden the light goes on at some point in his career. If you look at Chris Bosio, who's a pitching coach with the Cubs, he, of course, pitched a no-hitter, former major league guy. Apparently, when you talk to the people that work under him, he's even-headed. He's able to build confidence, and he was able to do that with Jake. So, I guess and then, of course, you have a manager like Joe Madden who comes over who, is very innovative. He's a player's manager because he trusts you to do the right thing as a player, gives you a lot of room. Again, if they stay healthy, and that's a big if because you just never know what's going to happen in this game, they certainly seem to be one of the favorites. I guess that's why Dexter Fowler turned down the $33 million in Baltimore and then went back to the National League and the Cubs for a lot less money, only 1 year guaranteed. So, they have a chance to be a real good team, and, we'll just kind of see. I mean, that's the great thing about it. When Jimmy Williams managed the Red Sox, I said, Jimmy, it looks like, on paper, the Red Sox are going to be real good. He said, Jim, you know what you can do with paper. Something you flush down the toilet. So, I think anybody that's ever played the game realizes that, you may be a good team on paper, but you got to stay healthy. Everybody that played against the Cubs, they're going to go, okay, what did they do in 2015 where they had a terrific year? We're going to try to make some adjustments. And some of those guys who, they have some marvelous players, young players. Theo Epstein maybe went in a little different direction where most teams try to go out and get a lot of good young pitching. He went for something that maybe has more of a premium, which is good young hitters. So let's see if they can keep it up because they have some marvelous young talent.
Thumpers, to say the least. Jim, thanks so much for calling into the show. This has been a pleasure. I'd love to have you out here in Los Angeles next time you're local.
Well, this year I'm actually the Orioles play the Dodgers, and I have not. Let's see, I used to do Monday Night Baseball with Al Michaels and Tim McCarver, so I used to do some Monday night games there. But I have a chance over the course of the summer, and then I have a place out in Corona Del Mar. And my autistic son Spencer went to school out there, so we usually come out from the summer in May, and I just kind of run around the country doing Oriole games. So, maybe we'll actually see each other at Dodger Stadium.
I'd love that. Come on out here, Jim. I'd love to chat with you when you come out here.
Well, thanks. Hey, thank you for asking me to be on.
Of course.
Appreciate it.
Anytime. That is Jim Palmer, Hall of Famer, at Jim22Palmer.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern. On Audience.